She's very bisexual. Hello, if you have not seen my face before, my name is Evelyn Kay. I am here to talk about the things that I want to talk about. Whether you want to hear me talk about them or not, you are still here though. So, welcome, I suppose. I did a Halloween look today, guys. I know it doesn't go with the Hunger Games theme, but it goes with what was in my heart, okay? Wait, I used I used the black eyeshadow to represent her father's ashes. Do you guys remember that fucking me? Anyway, spoiler warning for the Hunger Games, the books, the movies, the blah, 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 blah. I feel redundant saying spoiler warnings for the subject of the video that you clicked on, but I still feel the need to appease potentially wrathful strangers anyway, so, you know, there's that. Anyway, so the Hunger Games fuck. Why did the Hunger Games age so well? I hope that you can't hear the dogs wrestling in the background. I am dog sitting right now, so if you hear rustling, it's not haunted. Or is it? Spooky. So why did the Hunger Games age so well? Aging comes for us all, right? Time inevitably keeps ticking on no matter what we do. Yeah, but some things age better than other things, right? Do you ever revisit something that you loved as a kid only for your mental capacity to have kicked in and you realize that it kind of sucked? I've had the opposite thing happen with the Hunger Games, because I feel like on the milk to wine spectrum of aging, Hunger Games franchise is a beautiful Chardonnay. I say as if I know anything about wine, but I think the joke still makes sense. Anyway, at least mostly. There are a couple of things that didn't age the best. For example, like some of the advertising for the series.
Bold can be standing up for what you believe in. And now, Bold can be found at Subway. Fiery footlongs, a revolution in bold taste.
Easy, breezy, beautiful, cover girl.
I just want to know, who watched the original Hunger Games and went, you know what this would be great for? Selling Subway sandwiches. Even the title, it's called The Hunger Games. Is that all they did? Did they just read the title? I don't want to know. Anyway, specifically, I feel like the Catching Fire ad from Subway, it feels like the Divergent series. Like something that wanted the vibe of a dystopia without any actual plan other than trying to sell something, you know? However, I will defend the Hunger Games name with this kind of thing, okay? Because one of the drawbacks of something being popular is it either got that way because it was diluted enough to become marketable, or in the exception that something reaches public consciousness without reducing its meaning down to a palatable version. The aspects of the media that are the most impactful and long-lasting in public consciousness are the parts of the series that already align with current societal values. Which means that even if a work is presented in its authentic, complex, nuanced entirety, the parts that will be remembered most are the parts that are typically the easiest to talk about in the general public. For example, not you. I'm assuming that you know at least a little bit about the Hunger Games. You're watching a video about the Hunger Games. Again, if you don't, I'm still glad you're here. I'm just a little confused, but you're still welcome. Anyway, I'm going to assume that the majority of you, at least, are fans of the Hunger Games to a certain extent, right? And your knowledge might range from having read them in middle school and just kind of remembering the general overview of the storyline of a rebellion against a tyrannical government from the perspective of a teenage girl who accidentally throws herself in the center of it all by becoming a symbol of freedom, to being someone like me who has spent way too much mental energy, depending on who you ask, analyzing every little detail of this series, in part because it has kind of become a comfort media to me. Which, yeah, it's a little fucked up that the series about the child death games is comforting to me, but don't think about that too much. I'm going to do the thinking for you in a later segment. And another thing that I love about this series is I feel like it rewards me when I look into it. Like I was talking about earlier, sometimes you revisit media that you liked before your brain was developed, and like, my brain's 90% cooked. I am officially 24 years old. But like... So I'm 90% of the way there, right? So I look back on stuff that I genuinely loved as a kid, and sometimes it's a little disappointing. But the Hunger Games, I feel like, has rewarded me every single time I have looked at it critically, every single time I have revisited it. It's just got so much to bite into, you know? There's enough nuance and symbolism and interpretations that critical thinking about the series is rewarded. like another series or two that I will not name. Name them for me in the comments below so I don't have to be controversial. It's too early for me to be controversial, okay? However, all that to say, no matter where you fall on the spectrum of being a fan of this series, if you asked the average person who was not on that spectrum at all what they remember about the Hunger Games, it would probably be the I volunteer meme.
I volunteer! I volunteer as tribute!
The fact that children died, and the love triangle. Which brings me to the second aspect that aged less than great and has at least soured a bit to my nose, which is basically reducing Katniss's entire character into choosing which teen heartthrob she'll marry at the end of the series. I can cope a bit by viewing this love triangle as symbolism of peace versus wartime mentality manifested in Katniss's needs in a partnership changing as she goes through the things that she goes through. But let's be real. That's not how the general public is going to remember this series. I think to a lot of people, including the advertisers that decided to heavily lean on the triangularness of it all, Team Peeta versus Team Gale was the spiritual successor to Team Edward versus Team Jacob. It's just a fact of what happened, right? Because like it or not, Twilight's success has a very obvious impact in how the Hunger Games movies were marketed and also how they were interpreted by people. People were primed. People were ready. They loved to be on a team. Which hot man do you support? New game show. Which hot man do you support? Which one is the least problematic? But also the timing of everything was kind of perfect because the prime era of Twilight being popular and then the Hunger Games being popular, that was prime teenage media being respected and having a heavy hit in the film industry. I'm not going to dismiss Twilight as lesser than the Hunger Games, okay? I think they both had their things. I think that Twilight is a great work of Mormon fan fiction in which the author tells on herself way more than she might have been aware of and reveals a lot of unsettling beliefs that others in her faith and upbringing probably share, such as thinking a woman can somehow look indecent in a long khaki skirt.
I ended up in my only skirt. Long, khaki-colored, still casual. I put on the dark blue blouse he'd once complimented. A quick glance in the mirror told me my hair was entirely impossible, so I pulled it back into a ponytail. Okay, I bounced down the stairs. I'm decent. He was waiting at the foot of the stairs, closer than I'd thought, and I bounded right into him. He studied me, holding me a careful distance away for a few seconds before suddenly pulling me closer. Wrong again, he murmured in my ear. You are utterly indecent. No one should look so tempting. It's not fair.
Okay, girl. So the love triangle aspect wasn't that bad. I just think that, in my mind at least, it's not a sore spot, but it's not like the best part of the fandom either. And to be fair, it was a pretty big part of the books and Katniss's character. Not the majority, but a decent chunk, right? I mean, part of Katniss's personal tension that she has to resolve through the series is the fact that her relationship with Peeta was turned into a public parasocial commodity for the people of the capital, and she was literally forced to play along by a dictator threatening her family. Huh? Like, imagine being 17 and confused about your love life, and then you come home one day to the president sitting in your living room just so he could tell you face to face that you have to choose a specific one, or else literal civil war will break out. And he will probably kill your family, and the other boy that you have a crush on, question mark. I don't know why, that seems like one of those extreme things they tell like teenagers to get them to not do something. Don't touch yourself or you'll go blind. Don't have sex, you'll immediately get pregnant and die. You need to be monogamous better or else the country is gonna collapse into civil war and the president is gonna threaten your fucking family. Ooh, that's a new one. I haven't heard that. Be monogamous better or else civil war. Yeah. Anyway, I also do legitimately think a lot of the initial buzz around the love triangle was fans weighing in with their opinions, especially as the books were coming out and there was still some gray area of who Katniss would end up with. And this discussion of who your favorite character will inevitably date is a much easier discussion to have than like the ethics of war crimes and the complicated ways truth can be turned into propaganda for the sake of a political agenda. You know what I mean? It's kind of like what I was talking about earlier, where the easier conversations are typically the ones that are amplified the most. Because, for example, nobody is going to be like, Team Capital, right? I shouldn't say no one. Most people aren't Team Capital. So in fan spaces where discussions are being had, no one is debating on Team Capital versus Team Impoverished Districts. But arguing about which hot boy is hotter? Now that's a conversation that everybody wants to chime in on, right? What makes the Hunger Games different? So we've talked about the stuff that didn't age the best, or at least some parts of it, right? Which again, it was mostly how the media itself was interpreted. I will also say real quick, this isn't scripted. Something that I also don't think aged the best is the movies definitely sanitized the books. If you read the books and then you watch the movies, there's a lot that is taken out. Like the existence of Avoxes is nearly completely glossed over. The actors who play a lot of the children were older than they were supposed to be in the actual books themselves, which is both good and bad. Like, yay for less child labor. I'm not trying to... But also, part of the visceralness of the Hunger Games was supposed to be that these were very young people.
Hey, editing Evelyn wanting to pop in to clarify this. I think the point I was trying to make is the fact that the kids in the Hunger Games were so young that if they existed in our current world and our current timeline, they would be protected by things like child labor laws and stuff like that. And that kind of shows the amount of injustice that these children are experiencing, the amount of cruelty of taking these kids that we have laws to protect just from being on set for too long and to not be exploited in that way, seeing them exploited for entertainment and being forced to kill each other. And there's just something too, I want to say almost the absurdity of the fact that we couldn't depict the cruelty that is normalized in the Hunger Games series to its full extent because of the labor laws that we have for children. I still don't know if I explained that really well, but yeah, cool.
You know what I mean? The violence was toned down, but at the same time, all of that was so that the movies could get made, right? The Hunger Games as an R-rated movie would have probably never gotten funding, permission, no. It would have never happened, right? So it's not my favorite thing ever, but it is something that I've just come to accept as a necessity for the Hunger Games movies existing. So we've talked a little bit about the stuff that didn't age the best. Let's talk about the parts that stayed unproblematic and used SPF. Symbolism. I know sometimes curtains are just blue, but isn't it so much more satisfying whenever there's a reason why the curtains are blue? There's a lot of very obvious symbolism in the Hunger Games, but beyond the obviousness, there's subtlety and nuance that makes it all flow together very nicely. To not derail this entire video, I'm just going to talk about the symbol itself of the series, the Mockingjay. There's a lot more, but I would want to dedicate a whole video. If I was to break down all the symbolism and shit, that'd be future. That script's not written, this one's written. Written, makeup done, I'm here. Bisexual lighting is on. This is not my house. I'm doing it. So the Mockingjay, right? The meaning of it is so interwoven in the story that I think anyone who even just read the books once understands it. But I also think not all good symbolism needs to be subtle. Not all good symbolism needs to be the curtains were blue and that represented blah, blah, blah. Sometimes it's just in your fucking face. That's what the Mockingjay is, right? Like, yeah, comparing Katniss to the Mockingjay because it's a symbol for the rebellion seems kind of obvious, but there is a lot of world building that Suzanne put into it to make it feel so perfect. So if you don't know, the Mockingjay is the result of one of the Capitol's mutations because the Capitol likes to mutate animals in order to torture people. Keep up. They created one of these mutations called a Jabberjay to aid in the war against the rebels, and the Jabberjay was basically sent out into the rebel territories, and the Jabberjay could repeat human speech perfectly. However, the rebels very quickly went, what the fuck is that bird? And why is it at every one of our meetings? And started just saying lies to the Jabberjays. And so the Jabberjays would return to the capital. They would, be fed lies. Eventually they realized. And so they just released the Jabberjays into the wild, expecting them to die off. Because also, all of the Jabberjays were male, I'm pretty sure. So they just assumed, and you know what assuming does, right? Don't do that to my boy Ming. So long story short, surprise, Jabberjays ended up being able to mate with female mockingbirds. And then suddenly, there is a whole species of half man, half bird. There's a whole species of half man-made and half natural bird flying around that becomes so ingrained in Panem's culture, people literally use them to communicate to each other in District 11 when the harvest is done for the day. That's crazy, right? The capital underestimated the will and the ability of the Jabberjays to survive, and that resulted in something they didn't predict and couldn't control. Mockingjays are proof that the capital's iron fist is a facade. Their existence is in spite of the capital. And comparing that to Katniss, a girl who was born into a world that forced her to be resourceful and develop skills to survive and protect her family, but could never completely give in to the cruelty and remained compassionate to those who needed her. It's just... it makes so much sense. Katniss is the result of the capital underestimating somebody's will to survive, and that was their downfall. Gorgeous. And there's so much other like Mockingjay symbolism. I want to analyze this scene after spoilers Prim's death, when Katniss is like laying there and Prim is like a Mockingjay and is trying to like get her to come with her. I want to analyze that. I want to analyze like what's going on there. To be fair, Mockingjay is the book that I listen to them. Mockingjay is the book that I've listened to the least because oh, it is comforting, but it still hurts to get through to the end. Something else that I love about the Hunger Games series, and I think makes it more interesting and leaves more room for interpretation, is the fact that all 4 books have unreliable narrators to a certain extent. Some are more reliable than others, but still. Between Haymitch, Katniss, and Snow, all 3 have their blind spots because they're human. They don't know everything, you know? Also, I just love the comparison between Katniss and Haymitch. Katniss' very bare bones description of a lot of the things, especially in District 12. She will just tell you the bare minimum necessary information to get her point across, and often kind of accidentally dropping hints for the audience to pick up on, while she just dismisses them entirely, which kind of creates an interesting reader-protagonist dynamic, where typically the reader understands what's going on better than the protagonist herself. And I think that that's kind of neat. But compare that to Haymitch. Haymitch doesn't know what's going on all the time. Of course not. But he'll describe District 12 where it's like, this is my best friend of all of my life. He lives 5 houses down from me. Here are his parents. Here are all 5 of his cousins. Like, it just shows the way that they are fundamentally different. Mostly because of their circumstances, right? Also, how each point of view character describes the things and people around them reveals a lot about their character. It reveals how they view people, what details about somebody they value, all that kind of thing. And that reveals a lot about the character themselves. Like, in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, boo. Not boo as in bad, but boo as in, I'm about to talk about a dictator. Boo. We get an inside preview into Snow's twisted perspective of the world, to put it lightly. And we see very quickly, he views people based off of what they can do for him. We see that his love for Lucy Gray is possessive and toxic. He constantly analyzes every social interaction to see the hidden meaning behind everybody's words, and to make sure that his pristine reputation is maintained despite his horrible way of looking at the world. I also think that I had an interesting perspective on this because I watched the movie before I read the book, which I don't normally do, but I was just excited. I hadn't really read the books in a while, and I just wanted to go see the movies. And I think it's interesting that movie Coriolanus is a lot more, not necessarily redeemable, but I can at least understand why people might like him. But then book Coriolanus, he can't go a page without being an absolute fucking cunt, and not in the serving way, you know? Like, I joke about the fact that Snow seems more redeemable whenever he's being played by a conventionally attractive white man.
Like, it's fine to think he's hot. I mean, they cast an objectively attractive white boy, but he is still a dictator that kills children for political gain. So maybe put the thirst trap down, babe.
And I do think that that's true, but I also just genuinely think that every moment you aren't hearing his thoughts is a moment he wins, because his thoughts are so fucking rude. Like, so many of the things that he does in the story, he often does because he knows they will be viewed as selfless and respectable, not because he actually cares. Whereas I feel like in the movie, if you hadn't read the book, there was at least a couple of times where there was some gray area, and there's a couple of gray areas still in the book, but it's much fewer and far between. And we do also, more in the book, see the humanity that's kind of hidden in him in his desperation to be in control. But that desperation still leads him to dehumanize everyone around him and view everyone around him as a pawn, basically. My voice keeps cracking. I said imagine being 17 and my voice said bet. But yeah, his desperation to be in control simultaneously reveals his humanity, but it's also what he uses to justify, in a lot of ways, dehumanizing the people around him. He almost kind of dehumanizes himself a little bit. Like, he views everyone as a pawn. He views himself as like the king piece, but that's still dehumanizing because he uses that persona that he's built up to play the political game, and he also uses it to detach himself from his worst actions. He judges himself with the same criteria that he judges others, but obviously warped. Because other people he judges and calculates their usefulness based off of their lineage and their connections and their money. There's a lot of a little bit of eugenics in there. Let's be real. The whole lineage and birthright and But anyway, him hiding behind these merits that he values means he has glaring blind spots that he purposefully looks away from in order to justify his own cruelty. Comparing Snow and Haymitch, there are some similarities, specifically in seeing a fuller picture of people with their families and social ties. But the main difference is Haymitch typically does this to try and understand them better, whereas Snow does it to calculate their use to him. I feel like Haymitch is more likely to talk about somebody's family and connections and all that, more as putting them into context of his world rather than how they can be of use to him and why he does or doesn't have to treat them with respect. And to be fair, Haymitch is not always completely accurate with his assumptions about people. He was pleasantly surprised by Maisley the more he got to know her. Even Wyatt, who he had a little bit of a bitter-ish start with. But he's always very aware of people's connections to one another and how this might affect their actions. Like how Lenore Dove had a connection to the Woodbine family, and this resulted in her throwing herself in the middle of the chaos of the reaping, which then, of course, eventually led for him to be chosen into going into the games. So his awareness and empathy for other people is literally what caused him to go into the games. That is crazy. It's also deviation from script. That's a great storytelling moment, right? Because the best stories are the stories where your character's actions have consequences and they aren't just thrust into something. Whenever a story is happening to a character, it doesn't feel as interesting as whenever a character is affecting the story. And so Suzanne has actually been really good at all of the reapings that we've seen, of even though there are aspects that the characters themselves can't control, they're still establishing themselves. So Haymitch wasn't chosen, he wasn't reaped. There was a boy who was reaped, he got shot. Spoilers, again, By this point, girl, you're in it with me. Whatever. But his need to protect Lenore Dove from potential harm is one of his character traits, right? And that is what causes him to, be picked as the replacement boy. Katniss volunteers. Even Lucy Gray shows a lot of personality in her reaping. So that's another good job, Suzanne Collins. I see you. Anyway, Haymitch is able to see people's usefulness to him, but that's not a side of himself he likes. He even initially judges Wyatt for viewing the game so analytically before he realizes that's just the way he was raised, to view things by his odd-maker family. And I also think in a strange way, that's kind of his way of coping with everything. But also, Wyatt's numbers thing reminds me of that one joke where it's back in my day, we didn't have autism, we just had a numbers guy. Oh, really?
That's Tim, our number boy. Hey, buddy. You didn't shake my hand. Oh yeah, Tim doesn't do that.
He's so antisocial.
Because he's the number boy.
He's a fucking dick.
Thank you, Tim. I just don't like that he's sitting over there by himself. You want to do the numbers?
I don't want to do numbers.
No. So we're gonna let Tim do the numbers, bounce his leg a lot, repetitively, and not say hi. Alright? Go fuck yourself.
Going back to Haymitch, though, we can see his empathy and the fact that he tries to suppress a more analytical side of himself in how he talks about Ampert. He knows that the likelihood of Ampert winning his games is low, and he sees Ambert's usefulness immediately and his intelligence and his ability to get the others to ally together. But Haymitch cares about him beyond just his usefulness. He sees his little brother in him, and he genuinely tries to protect him in the arena, even though he logically knows it's futile. He ignores that part of himself. He does the same thing with Lulu, and he genuinely mourns when they do eventually die in the arena. Whereas I feel like, Snow would have pretended to mourn for optics, right? So talking about our main girl, Katniss tends to see the surface level of people at first and kind of uses quick judgments to determine how much her guard should be up around them. She also typically works backwards in this way about interpreting people's actions and intentions. Again, she determines how much of her guard should be up, and then she interprets their actions based off of that initial snap judgment, and it takes her a long fucking time to put that shit down. So this also means that she can be extremely oblivious when describing something that the reader can see clearly. Like, remember when she convinced herself that Peeta was just pretending to like her as a strategy to kill her? She literally thought that. Girly pop. I love her. I'm specifically thinking of a moment after the carriage ride. I'll just read it. I realize I'm still glued to Peeta and force my stiff fingers to open. We both massage our hands. Thanks for keeping a hold of me. I was getting a little shaky there, says Peeta. It didn't show, I tell him. I'm sure no one noticed. I'm sure they didn't notice anything but you. You should wear flames more often, he says. They suit you. And then he gives me a smile that seems so genuinely sweet with just the right touch of shyness that an unexpected warmth rushes through me. A warning bell goes off in my head. Don't be so stupid. Peeta's planning on how to kill you. I remind myself, he's luring you in to make you easy prey. The more likable he is, the more deadly he is. But because two can play at this game, I stand on tiptoe and kiss him on the cheek, right on his bruise. Girl. Girl. What she has to convince herself is a moment of manipulation. We of course learn was a genuine compliment from Peeta trying to be nice to the girl he has a crush on. But she has to justify repressing her emotions somehow. So instead, Peeta has to only be pretending to be nice to lure her into a false sense of security. Or else she might have to actually admit that she cares about him. Maybe not likes him yet, but she cares about him, right? It is so obviously a trauma response. It's astounding. And as somebody who has done not quite to that extreme before, but I have had the exact same thought process of like, there's no way. They're just being nice. Fair warning, if you are ever trying to flirt with me, you have to be so overt. I'm not quite this level, but like, that's one of the reasons why I can recognize this behavior. Also, to be fair, once again, to be 17, or in this 16, to be 16 and to be oblivious to people flirting with you. But speaking of trauma responses, grounded characters. This is most obvious in Katniss, given that we get to be in her head for 3 whole books, so I'm mostly just going to be using her as an example for this segment. Suzanne Collins depicting actual representation of PTSD and trauma in Katniss is something that still sticks with me, to be honest. It makes everything feels so much more real when you're able to see how much everything she's been through weighs on her. Like sometimes in movies or books or whatever, you can just tell when something was written with the intention to make the audience sad, but the characters basically just go, oh no, she passed away. Oh. Anyway. And that's it. But through Katniss, we get to see a more grounded reaction to all this extremely traumatic stuff that she's put through, and it helps both ground the fictional world of Panem and Katniss herself. If she just shrugged off Rue dying after getting as close to her as she did and just went on a hunt to go get Cato, after all of those moments they shared and basically admitting that she viewed her as an extension of her little sister, that would have been so fucking brutal. I can see another book doing that though. And that's what makes this one so special, is that they didn't. Because I also think that would make me immediately distance myself from Katniss as a protagonist. That lack of empathy would make it hard to empathize with her. Not to mention, it would mean that in the future, the stakes would be much lower the next time she gets attached to somebody who could, die. Because we know that even if they do, she would move on in a chapter or 2.
Oh, she passed away? All right.
But instead, letting us ruminate with her in it, forcing us to see the cruelty of the situation by having her react very understandably to it. It just makes everything hit so much harder. Like, yeah, not every death or painful moment is given the same weight. I definitely don't cry as hard when the camera crew from Mockingjay die versus when Finnick does. A point of view character reacting realistically helps us put ourselves in their shoes and empathize with them. I also like that the trauma that these characters go through, especially Katniss, like her trauma isn't convenient, you know? Yeah, sometimes it's satisfying to be watching a show or movie or whatever, and they have the kind of almost like the classic anime moment of the protagonist standing up to the villain in the name of all the people they lost as a single tear rolls down their cheeks cinematically, and we get a montage of the dead characters flashing in their eyes, and that helps them summon the power they needed to finish the final blow. And that moment can be fun and cathartic. It's obviously not realistic, but I understand the appeal. However, trauma is often not as convenient as being a never-ending motivating force to help you achieve your goals. A lot of times it's messy and debilitating. It causes you to either make rash decisions or maybe even strips you of your faith in yourself to make decisions at all. It takes time and effort to heal, and it can feel as brutal as the moment that caused it. And that's why I like seeing Katniss react the way she does. She goes through so much more than anyone should ever have to, and there are plenty of times she legitimately can't handle it. Think about how rare it is to watch the hero of a story completely break down over the weight of their situation and remain the hero anyway. Like, I know it happens, and I feel like it's becoming more common in media, but the Hunger Games had y'all beat by at least a decade, okay? There were examples in the contemporary, but in this time frame, I cannot think of something that was this popular and this influential where that occurred. And also, saying hero is kind of the wrong word, actually, because that's something else I feel like this point emphasizes in the series. There aren't really heroes in the Hunger Games. Not in the traditional sense, at least. Both in the games themselves and on the series. There are people who do heroic things, but they're also shown to be capable of non-heroic and cowardly and cruel things too. There aren't actual heroes, there are people who play the role of hero. And in the end, they're still a person. A tragically lucky and unlucky person forced to become a symbol of a cause bigger than themselves. And we see the injustice of dehumanizing someone to do so, even though the side that I would assume most of us agree with are the ones that are doing it. It shows that even the people who you agree with ideologically in the fact of like, hey, fascism's bad, just because somebody says fascism's bad doesn't mean that they're a good person. Revolutionary, I know. Same coin, different side. Not poignant at all right now.
And just to clarify, because since recording this, things have got even worse politically, I just wanted to say flat out, fuck ICE, fuck fascism, fuck people in power that are promoting fascism, because whenever I say just because someone says fascism is bad doesn't mean that they're good, sometimes people say fascism is bad is because they're saying it's not their version of fascism. They want to be the ones that are the fascists. Just a reminder, fire is catching and ice melts.
If someone takes someone else saying fascism is bad as a personal attack, I think you know what they believe. It's going to be the end of what I say on that shit. This is a very poignant series, although that's a whole nother video in itself of like why the Hunger Games aged well, is in part because the world's kind of fucking falling apart, and we're seeing exactly how we could get to this point. Katniss carries her grief and trauma in every second of the series. And although that seems like it would be more depressing than that cool, action-packed, inspiring moment that I described earlier, we get to see that it's possible to heal from it. I argue that's more inspiring to me. That's a long-lasting inspiration, whereas the other one is a quick flash. Yes, it feels good in the moment, but this series is unique because we get to see someone reach their absolute limit of pain, of grief, of loss, of rage. We get to see her at her lowest point, and we get to see that she can still love. She can eventually create a life for herself where she feels comfortable and happy. The remnants of everything will always remain, but that's empowering in a way. It isn't that the end credits roll and joy exists because it's time for the happy ending to happen, right? It's a joy that exists not because there was never pain to overcome, but in spite of that pain. It is resilient joy that was hard fucking fought for. And that resilience is what makes the series so comforting to me. That's why I know it sounds weird when I say that this is a comforting piece of media, even though it's hard for me to listen to the last book, but knowing how it resolves, even though there's a lot of shit that sucks, even though there's a lot of character deaths that, ow, knowing that in the end, there is a realistic-ish happy ending, at least for some of the characters in it, makes it all seem doable, and in a way is kind of an optimistic take. Which brings me to my next point, realistic optimism.
Someday I'll explain it to you, but I'll tell you how I survive it.
I know describing a series about children being forced to murder other children as optimistic sounds wrong, but hear me out. The Hunger Games does not try and argue that people are always good and will always make the right decisions and therefore good will prevail. Instead, it takes a fictional world and shows the very real ways in which people can be cruel to each other. It shows how easy it is to be passive in the face of oppression. Not out of laziness or moral corruption, but simply out of the desire to keep what little you're able to lay claim to safe. There's plenty of the moral corruption and other things, but for the vast majority of Panem, sure, your loved ones are always at risk of danger in such a situation, but they are guaranteed to be put in harm's way if you rebel against the forces that oppress you. So people become passive, either by force, like in the districts, or because they have been skillfully lulled into complacency with lavish lives and plausible deniability like in the capital. And yet, there are still flashes of joy in that world. Moments of kindness, moments of understanding, moments of empathy. No matter how oppressive the capital was, people would still care about one another. In fact, a lot of people argue that the difficulties the capital put its citizens through in an attempt to control them was their undoing, aka the Mockingjay, Katniss Everdeen herself. Symbolism. Bringing it back, baby. The desperation the capital put the districts under in order to control them resulted in the district's resourcefulness. And more specifically, Katniss's intense resolve and skill to back it up that allowed her to be the winner of the games, and beyond that, forcing the capital to spare both her and Peeta's life. Sure, that moment was only a spark in the face of an empire, but there had been people fighting for generations before her to set that kindling down so that that spark could catch. She just happened to be the one both lucky and unlucky enough to watch it all go up in flames and reveal how truly fragile it all was. Because another thing that this series insists is that this is not a normal way for humans to view each other. That despite how cruel or passive or apathetic most of Panem is, that behavior didn't come naturally. It was taught and desperately upheld by a fascistic government in an attempt to control its citizens, but eventually, the facade cracked, and underneath it was revealed to be a collective mass of imperfect people all trying their best, all capable of violence or mercy or kindness or cruelty or hate or love, all shaped by the world around them but never completely stripped of their capacity for any of those things. It revealed a world in which things could get better, where wounds could heal, where those who are lost can be remembered and new things can grow from the ashes. And that is why The Hunger Games is an optimistic series for me. Not because it shies away from the darkest parts of humanity and only focuses on the good, because it presents both aspects in as much of their entirety as possible and chooses in the end to take them both in and be hopeful anyway. And that bittersweet argument holds water so much more to me than anything else that simply denies or deflects from the darker sides of humanity in order to say something inspiring. Suzanne Collins legitimately changed my brain chemistry with her work. And I think That's one of the reasons why this series is a source of comfort for me, because we get to watch people go through some of the worst things imaginable, and without belittling them or denying them, in the end, we get to see them heal, at least as much as possible. We get to see that there was always resistance to cruelty. Even in the small ways, people were kind to each other. There's another great video about this if you want to watch it. The Perfect Cruelty of the Hunger Games by 5x5 Takes. I love that video a lot. I had to try actively to not step on its toes and make different points in this one. If you want to hear me talk though, I have 2 other videos that I have made about the Hunger Games, one of which is a theories video, that my top 15 theories, and the other one is where I ask the very important question, who is worse? President Snow or Gale? So if you want to see more of my face, you can click those. I also have links down below. I have a Patreon. If you want to be my first member on Patreon, you'll get an extra special shout out. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing there. I think I'm going to be doing more like vlogs and behind the scene content, but I also want to collaborate with y'all and know what you want to see. Also, little anecdote before my phone dies. Whenever I went to college, I went to honors college, and my first day of class in honors college, they had us fill out a paper that I didn't realize we'd be reading out loud to the class, and it asked for your favorite book. And as everyone else was reading theirs aloud, a class of 20 people, I didn't go quite last, but a lot of people went before me. And I remember thinking, oh my God, everyone else put these super smart, brainy books, and I had to sit there and go, hi, my name is Evelyn. My favorite book is The Hunger Games. And you know what? I stood by it. I stood by it. When someone asked me why, I think I said it was the last book I remember reading and genuinely being excited to read it, which is also kind of sad, but true. But revisiting it later, I realized there's so much to this series, man. I love it so much. I will definitely be making more videos about it eventually. I'm kind of just letting the lightning of inspiration strike me wherever it does. This channel is for me, first and foremost. I want to make things that you guys enjoy, but it has to be motivated by my own joy first. Also, I'm really worried my phone is about to run out of storage again, so thank you so much for watching. If you got this far, let me know your Hunger Games hot takes. Again, Patreon, blah, 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 all the go subscribe and shit. Subscribe and then shit. Yeah, okay. I think that's, I need to be done. Okay, love you. Parasocially. Goodbye. Oh, thank fuck. Oh my God. Okay, I did it. Oh my God. I have just spent the last 45 minutes trying to figure out how I was going to do this, because I was deleting everything off my phone, girl, and it didn't have any storage. Okay, at least I've got this. I got it done. How are my bats holding up? They're okay. They're holding up okay. She's migrating. That's okay. We love her. Bye.